All right, my good friends, this is Mr. Davis here on Monday night. So a lot of you guys have submitted your DBQ, and I think I put Tuesday at 9 p.m. was the deadline in that. So you want to get that turned in. I've been able to just about get back to everyone that's turned it in. I'm seeing some really good work. I'm seeing some stuff that I told you to do last week that you improved on. The one big thing that I will tell you is that you are a lawyer in this exam, so you are defending your claim. Actually, the first two papers I got turned in, they were exact opposite thesis statements. One said something was a good idea, and then somebody said the exact same thing was a bad idea. And they both did great on their papers because they followed the format and they argued. It does not matter if I believe you, if we share the same opinion about a certain thing. Like, it's history. I could say the most evil man in the world was Adolf Hitler, and you could say it was Joseph Stalin, and neither one of us are right or wrong. Those are just our opinions. It's how and this course is going to be based on how you argue your opinion. The one thing I would say is that you're the lawyer, so every document you want to make the document work for you. So just put yourself back in a courtroom type of situation. If you're like a defense attorney. A defense attorney is someone trying to put someone in jail. Okay. And I'm sorry, I said that wrong. A defense attorney is someone trying to keep somebody out of jail, but it doesn't matter. You're defending or you're prosecuting. So you have all of this evidence. If you were trying to put somebody in jail with the evidence that you have, you wouldn't get in front of the jury and say, I know that this guy is guilty because we found footprints at the scene and he wears the same style of shoe. So you wouldn't say that, which helps you, and then come back and say, but really, these are Nike shoes, and Nike probably sold 1 million of these shoes in America. So chances are there's a lot of people in our town that also wear shoes. But he does have a pair of these shoes. So what I mean by this is if you have a document that could help or hurt you, you want to talk about why that document helps your case. You don't want to waste time saying why that document hurts you and helps you. Just take a stance, stick to your thesis, tell us why it helps your case, and ignore maybe something else that somebody else could use and on their side of the coin. Okay, if that makes sense. So argue your point. Do not argue the opposite point, which some of us have done. You might say the Colombian Exchange was really harmful for the Americans, but it also did some good things, and this is what it did. If you say that the maritime empires were destroyed their culture, tell me why that destroyed their culture. Don't tell me it destroyed their culture, but it also did good things. Tell me why it destroyed their culture. Okay, so be firm, and it'll also save you some time. So that was one thing. I'm seeing some wishy-washy going back and forth on your evidence. Just make sure the evidence works for you. And the sourcing is one thing that we'll have to work on this next couple of weeks. You always have to think of like every document that you get. There was a purpose for that document being created, and so you want to think, why did this? Why was this document created? Who is intended to read this document? What did the person who made it believe? And what was the actual purpose? Okay, it's just like hipping a text message. Every time you send a text, there's a situation why you sent the text. There's an intended audience who you sent it to. There is what you feel about the text, and then what do you want to be the outcome of the text you sent. Okay, do you want somebody to do something for you? Do you want somebody to think about something? Do you want to get something off your chest? Do you want to tell a joke? Do you want to check on someone? There's a purpose for everything we do. Okay, so think about that when you're hipping things. Why did the person create it? What was their purpose? Point of view, etc. So, but you're getting better at that. And then a few things about outside evidence. Outside evidence is getting good. That is stuff that comes straight from your notes, but just tie the outside evidence back to your thesis, and then it's got to come outside of the context. So you can't be within your context. It's always, and some teachers I said just could be your last paragraph and saying additionally, these were key pieces of evidence that also prove the thesis, which are, and then you could come up with some other outside evidence. But outside evidence really just it's going to show you how organized you'll be and how you can find stuff quickly on an open notes exam. All right, but let's get into content. So your whole DBQ is how the Europeans, mainly the Spanish, affected the American Indians over here. Amerindians, the natives. I would make the argument that the one thing you want to know about this is basically they wipe out the population because of the Great Dying, and they replace the culture because so many people die that it's almost like there's no culture left, and the people that are left, they rip their religion away from them. They make them become Catholics. The Spanish Inquisition would go after people that don't want to practice Catholicism. Now, surely there was good examples of good Christians. We read about one of the priests that was telling us about how the Spanish were so greedy and violent and mean, and all they cared about was getting money, etc. So there's certainly tons of great Catholics over here. But don't fall into the trap that just because you are Catholic, that you have to stand up for the church's main objective over here, colonizing these people, because there's a lot of unspeakable things. So don't, just because you're Catholic, you support Catholicism, this region ended up Catholicism, you don't want to really paint yourself into the corner. You definitely don't want to paint yourself into a corner of defending slavery. Okay, you don't. Slavery did make the economy of the Americas amazing, but it's going to make it amazing for rich white business owners, not for the slaves, not for the majority of the people. So don't fall into that trap of slavery. Also, another thing about slavery is, and don't fall into this trap, is that Africa's population here, it does not plummet because of the slave trade. Actually, because of the Colombian Exchange and because of maize, which is corn, and the potato that comes over to Africa, there's a population explosion in Africa. So don't use that as a fact that they got depopulated dramatically. Some villages will get depopulated of their biggest and strongest men, but all in all, Africa goes on a big population boom, just like Champa rice did to China, hundreds of years before that. Things to know about the Portuguese, we saw in those Heimler history videos, were called trading post empires. They didn't have a large enough empire to just colonize this whole area over here, but they found strategic spots and they made people pay them money. Here's some different facts in here. Mercantilism was used by several of you guys. Mercantilism meant that your country's wealth is dependent on their gold or silver, so that's why they're out getting the gold and glory. China is still a big dog at this point, and after Zhang He, they closed their borders. They're trading with silver because they had used paper money in China, but it was becoming counterfeit, and you can't really counterfeit silver. So the Potosi mines, where they would have funerals for the workers before they even left for work in Peru, all that silver was going over to China, and that got the Europeans a seat at the Chinese trading tables. Because remember, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the English, they don't have anything to trade with these guys. So let's see here. France started sponsoring expeditions in the Northwest. So this slide is about the French. The French were different in a lot of ways in that compared to the Spanish. Let me pause this for just 1 second. Okay, we're back in action. My battery was dying, so it's kind of scrambling there. So, talking about the French, and basically what is going on is every country is kind of going by direction. So, the Portuguese went down to India and they went southeast. So, Christopher Columbus convinces the Italians that he can go west. He eventually could have gotten there, but the Americas were in his way. And the French decided to go north, and they were looking for a Northwest Passage, which is a pretty easy concept to think of. A Northwest Passage was just straight across the Atlantic, and then you're going to end up in the Pacific. Now, technically, you could do that, but it's filled with ice. It was a miserable journey. There was one sailor that discovered it or made it all the way through. I'll try to put in his name when I'm making this Ed puzzle. But the French, that's why they speak. Some people in Canada speak French today. Jacques Cartier, they travel all around the St. Lawrence Seaway, Montreal, the Great Lakes in North America and the United States, and then they go down to the Mississippi River. So this is different things. Now, the French were Catholic, so they did bring over missionaries. They tried to convert some natives to Christianity, but the French rarely settled permanently. They didn't have the same religious problems that England was having with the Church of England, etc. So the French were businessmen, and they would trade. They would bring rifles, and they would also bring alcohol. And and some of you guys wrote that in one of your outside evidence pieces of the essay, which was great. The English, they were more of your like putting the stakes down, and they were staying. So the 13 colonies. So it's amazing if you look at. Let me see if I can go back here real quick. I should probably just put it up in the video. All right, so the 13 colonies. This little flag right here, this is England. This is France, how big France's territory is, and this is how big Mexico's territory. But this little sliver is England. So England also is going to go, they're going to go west to the 13 colonies, but then they also go into India as well. So they're in both hemispheres. But that is England. But the French are going to get booted out of North America. And then in like 1815, Napoleon sells. No, it's not 1815. I'll put the exact year. It's like 1807 or something like that, where Napoleon sells Louisiana Purchase to America. So it's no longer this British Empire, it's to America. And Napoleon did that because Haiti had revolted against the French. And when the French lost Haiti, they had no need for New Orleans down here. All right, so this is my New Orleans Cajun accent. So let's look at the English a little bit. Jamestown's the first colony. There could be some about 13 colonies maybe. I think this DBQ is going to be something really broad, like explain how trading empires were set up, or explain resistance movements that occurred throughout history, which will give you a big, broad topic to talk about. But so there could be something in here about the 13 colonies. I wouldn't put it totally past them. This is a really cool graphic. If I were you, maybe I would just copy and paste this into a Google Doc and put this into our folder, comparing transoceanic voyages. This is just great facts. So this could be good outside facts if it was a maritime DBQ. You got Shanghai, what the Chinese were doing, what the Portuguese were doing, what the Spanish were doing, etc. But we didn't talk about the Dutch. They're very similar to the English, and terms of private people are funding the Dutch's exploration. The Dutch made really good ships. They utilized their technology, and the Dutch actually founded what is today New Amsterdam in New York City. And it was a very huge, prosperous city. So that was a little bit about the Dutch there. The Colombian Exchange, I won't go over too much about it because you know a lot about the Colombian Exchange and some good things and some bad things. So the Great Dying, this is a great fact, even though it's very large data set here. 50 to 90% of the indigenous population due to smallpox, measles, influenza, and malaria had died because of this. And so basically, the this new caste system gets set up by the Spaniards over in Central and South America because the Indians are largely just wiped off the map. So they can't use the encomienda system. They can't use the Midas system. So they have to turn towards Africa to get the triangular trade going and get slaves over in America. This is different animals that were brought. This is a good human interaction with the environment, and then diseases, food, etc. It would be good to have that Colombian Exchange graphic somewhere in your notes that you can get to, just so you can say, oh yeah, the horse was going from Europe to the Americas. So you kind of don't get, so like if you're trying to use that as outside evidence, you would be able to use it correctly. Sugar has grown down in the colonies, and the big thing for the Europeans is, one, they wanted to get all this great stuff, the spices and all kinds of other things, but up here in Northern Europe, they can't grow all these great crops. They can't grow sugar up in Northern Europe, so that's why these colonies are so prosperous over here. So the sugar trade. Sugar cultivation in Brazil required the constant importation of slaves from the Congo. So the Congo Empire was capturing and selling their own people or their own neighbors into slavery. This is a good fact here too. The forced movement of Africa people is known as the African Diaspora. The language not able to transplant this to the New World. What was going on is that some African languages were combined with colonizer languages like Creole in southern U.S. Oftentimes, different tribes had different languages. There wasn't this huge African identity during the slave trade like we would maybe see more today, but they did bring their own culture with them. They brought music. They brought, in some forms, they had different religions, like they're different kind of they had different types of Christianity they brought with them, or some cases voodoo that was brought over with them. But the African presence in America, because there are so many that end up living in the United States, is a big cultural impact into the Americas. And this is what I was talking about before. It would be good to have this at your disposal during the test, so you know what is coming, food, bad stuff, etc., etc. So that's a good slide. And then let's see where rubber is found here. But one of the DBQs, like talked about, like I was reading a prompt from a past DBQ, and it was like explain how rubber was important to a certain society. And if you get like something like really obscure, like a little detail like that, don't freak out. Just read the docs, and then everything will kind of come flooding back to you. But so rubber was first used as an eraser, quinine used for treatment of malaria. And again, I'm going fast. I expect you to kind of read over this several times to really get the gist of this Unit 4. So different trading posts in Africa and Asia. This would be a good read here. So the Africans were making deals with the European traders. The Europeans did not go in the interior heartland of Africa. They were already ready to go on the coast. They made deals, the Europeans and the big tribal leaders like the Congo Empire. King Alfonso was a king that took the king of the Congo that took the name King Alfonso, and he actually converted to Christianity to please the Europeans. And so it does take two to tango in the slave trade. The Swahili coast, Swahili is a mix of Arab and Bantu languages. So the Swahili coast that was on the eastern side of Africa, and what the excuse me, I'm getting tired here. Um, the Portuguese, like we said before, they had trading post empires, but they weren't taking over like huge countries or anything like that. What other crazy things are going on in the world during the age of exploration? Japan remains an isolationist place. Still feudal Japan is still ruled by the shogun and the daimyo class and samurais, etc. So they remain isolated at this point. And in fact, Portuguese Christians, when they met the shogun, they promptly got their heads chopped off. So the Japanese were not interested in meeting with these light-skinned Europeans. That is going to change in like the 1850s when Commodore Matthew Perry and his black ships show up and tell the Japanese that, hey, this isn't your choice anymore. You're going to industrialize and trade with us and let us come into your markets, or we're going to bring our real military back with us the next time. What was going on in China? The Ming Dynasty, the Mariners, they worked hard to limit the outside of influence by restricting trade. Remember that the Mings, they stopped exploration after Zhang He. The Chinese prohibited foreign trade. They would still use the kowtow and tribute system, and foreigners could get an audience with like the emperor or in his imperial court, but they weren't really taken seriously. The foreigners were mocked in China, especially when they talked about Christianity, because the Chinese said they were men of science, and that that the miracles that Jesus Christ did, they kind of laughed at and said, "Who are these people coming to tell us about science?" So the Chinese were not really accepting of the Europeans, but they were kind of, Japan and China are kind of like an iron curtain where the Europeans don't really get in. There's one city, in a trading city in China called Canton, where they're allowed to trade. Europeans are allowed to trade. So what the heck was going on in India during the age of exploration? Um, we left it in land-based empires with the Mughal dynasty, and the problem with the Mughal dynasty it was Muslims who were ruling Hindus, and there was a lot of problems between that too. As you can imagine, a large majority of people being ruled over by the minority religious group, then you don't see eye to eye. Like Muhammad would not be down with the caste system of the Hindu religion. So the Europeans take advantage of this internal strife between the Muslims and the Hindus, and this British East India Stock Company traded with the Mughal Empire. They focused originally on trade. The East Empire Company gained influence in India, increased its political power by making treaties with local rulers. Eventually, Great Britain controlled most of the Indian subcontinent. Portugal controlled a small trading post near Jao before being pushed out by the British. So the Portuguese they get off to a great start, but they're eventually going to get bullied around. And France is over here, but the main player up until the 1900s is Great Britain, running India and calling the shots in India. What's going on in the Americas? We talked a lot about Spain and the Aztecs and the Incan Empire. Spain versus Portugal. Another great fact is the Pope did not want his most Catholic nations fighting each other. So the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 divides the Americas between Spain and Portugal gets Brazil. And that's why today Brazil is the largest Portuguese-speaking country in the world, and Mexico is the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. Up in North America, you're going to see skirmishes. There's going to be a war called the French and Indian War, in which the British and the colonists defeat the French and the Indians in the 1750s, right at the end of this unit's time period. So I will kind of let you finish it out here, see where we are on this. Just a few more slides, and I'll finish probably with a guided reading in the next couple of days, and then we'll be done with Unit 4. Good thing is there's tons of stuff in Unit 4, but there's also tons of outside facts that are easy to use. A lot of stories you can easily remember. You've heard of these stories for a long time. So we will stop there, and I'll try to add some good tidbits, and I'll try to work hard on grinding out your DBQs, and we will do some more DBQ work. But thanks for working hard on those. I appreciate it.